Hi everyone, welcome to Saxon's Hydrosphere. I'm Saxon and I love music and I love movies, and with this channel I wanted to create a space where both music and movie lovers can coexist. And today I'm here to talk to you about the new Blind Guardian album, The God Machine. So Blind Guardian are a band that I massively enjoy and have done for years. They are probably one of my favourites in the power metal subgenre, and this is their first proper album in 7 years since Beyond the Red Mirror came out in 2015. The band did, however, put a little side project out a few years ago under the name Blind Guardian Twilight Orchestra, which was a completely orchestral album, which I liked in theory, with my huge attachment to songs like Sacred Worlds and Wheel of Time, and also really enjoying all the orchestral arrangements on the aforementioned Beyond the Red Mirror. But when it came to actually listening to it, it's not an album that really resonated a lot with me at all, because while I appreciated and admired the experimentation, all it kind of did for me was prove that an orchestra best suits this band when it's used at its most grand and bombastic as an accompaniment to the very metal foundation and Blind Guardian's signature style of power metal as a whole. And the main reason that I do bring up the Twilight Orchestra is because I feel that that album kind of forged the direction that the band would take for this new album. It feels like the band got the orchestral stuff out of their system for that one and were able to go into this new album kind of going a little bit back to basics really, with very little in the way of orchestration. Which, you know, you can take however you like, whether that's a good or a bad thing. Like I said, personally, I love when the band uses an orchestra to accompany their music to really accentuate the compositions. But what I will say is that the lack of a heavy orchestra here does make this album feel very fresh and kind of like a turning of a new page for the band. And that's not to say that this album is a U-turn or anything, or even out of character for the band. It still very much sounds and feels like a Blind Guardian record. You know, with the high energy rhythm sections, with the intense and multi-dimensional lead guitars, the wide and layered vocals with very fantastical lyricisms. And I think that this album does a great job of balancing familiarity and innovation. Stylistically speaking, I think there's pretty much something for fans of every era of the band to enjoy on this album, because while there is less emphasis on orchestration, there are still hints of it that pop in here and there to enhance certain atmospheres and emotions. It boasts huge riffs and choruses, very much like the speed metal era of the earlier albums, as well as fantastical and extensive melodic passages very much akin to the 90s output too. One big difference between this album and its predecessor is that it isn't a concept album of any kind. It doesn't connect to any stories or worlds established in previous records of the band's discography, but instead stands on its own with its own stories and themes, which helped to not give this new album any sort of grand expectation to expand on any lore or music already established and just let it be its own thing. Most of these tracks are based off of various different types of fictional literature, but there are two songs that break that pattern. Life Beyond the Spheres is a very ethereal song about the Big Bang and the creation of the universe effectively, and the wondrous span of the universe. And Let It Be No More is a very personal song about the recent passing of Hansi's mother, which of course is a very real, very grounded, very human and mature subject matter that I don't think this band have ever touched on before. And like I said, having all these songs not be part of one overarching story was the smartest move that the band could have made for this time, and makes it all feel very fresh and exciting. So I enjoyed the first single, Deliver Us From Evil, when it came out, which is also the first song on the album by the way. But being a fairly by the standards Guardian track, it didn't do a substantial amount to get me excited for the album when I first heard it. And following that, I was a little bit disappointed initially with the second single, Secrets of the American Gods. I thought this was a really interesting title, and I had a rather optimistic feeling that it might touch on some societal issues surrounding people of influence doing awful things behind the curtain, Hollywood being the first thing that came to mind, but was instead quite lyrically vague and obviously not about that subject at all. Which is fine, and probably my own fault for not controlling and managing expectation. Blind Guardian have always been very fantasy and otherworldly orientated, so I'll admit it was kind of a stretch for me to assume that. But on top of that, I didn't think the music was single material either. I found it to be quite lackluster initially, actually. But thankfully, when it came to listening to this album, this song made a lot more sense to me with the knowledge of it being an adaptation of fiction, and I enjoyed it a lot more within the context of the whole album. Which leads me on to another huge positive for this album, and that's the pacing. Firstly, it's not overly long, clocking in at just over 50 minutes, and I think that the way the songs were arranged really works for the album. Each transition between the songs feels very natural, and no two consecutive songs sound similar in any way really, which helps to keep them from losing any identity or blending together, which incidentally is a problem I see quite often with power metal, so I'm glad that this album avoids that trap. And also the production is a vast improvement on Beyond the Red Mirror as well. As much as I love that album, I do admit that the production was far from perfect. The vocals were occasionally a little bit buried, and there was this sense that the band didn't really know how to handle the mixing and mastering of the sheer amount that was going on in some of the compositions. But the God Machine is a huge step up. Everything is crisp and clear and consistent in pretty much every aspect, really. And another huge plus for this album, and perhaps my biggest praise, is Andre Olbricht's guitar playing. To go on a quick nerdy tangent, I think that Andre is one of the most underrated guitar players in metal, and in power metal he is by far my favourite. Hugely influential on my own playing, especially from the Nightfall album and onwards, with the way that he utilises melody, his layering of harmony, the kind of fast runs that he does, and I'm not just talking about solos either, it's everywhere in his compositions. He's also probably got the most iconic, unique and recognisable guitar tone in metal, and it's just as ethereal and gorgeous on this album as it ever has been. Hansi's voice feels incredibly invigorated on this album too. There's a very heavy theatrical vibe from him here, and you can hear and feel that he's really putting his all into his performance, and he actually gets quite aggressive in places when the music calls for it, as well as his signature layering and the softer sung passages. His passion is abundantly clear in this one, and it really adds to the overall experience listening to the album, and he is, as I said, much more present in the mix, which is a huge improvement. The rhythm section's tight as ever, but I don't have much to say about it beyond that. I think that's always been the aspect of the band that adds the least amount of uniqueness to them. But that's not to say that it's lame or boring or anything. The drums are actually really exciting. And there are some great moments across this album where little dynamic shifts are used to really hone in and enunciate some of the different moods on this album. I have a lot of personal attachment to Red Mirror and the two albums that preceded that, so it'll be hard for me to figure out where this album sits among the newer releases, but what I will say is that this is a very solid entry from the band, and I find more and more to love about it with each listen. It's a fresh and vibrant record that doesn't tie itself down to a singular concept or story, allowing itself to breathe a little new life into the band while still boasting a lot of the strengths that fans have come to love over the years. So that's it for my review of the new Blind Guardian album, The God Machine. Let me know what you thought of this album down below and where you think it sits in their overall discography. They are one of my favourite bands, so I might do a discography ranking for these guys one day too, who knows. Hi, it's me, editing the video that you're now watching. Now I know last week when I did my Megadeth video that I said that this week will be my David Fincher ranking video. I have for the moment just pushed that to next week so I could get this video out about a new and current album that's recently been released, but I promise that next week will be my David Fincher filmography ranking video. I promise.
It's 3 times you promise.
I'm going to leave you with my song of the day now, which has to be my all-time favourite Blind Guardian song. One of my favourite songs ever, actually. And when I saw this live, it was one of the best live experiences I've ever had. And that is, of course, Wheel of Time. The orchestration is bananas, and I love it. It's so bombastic and over the top. It's produced exceptionally well. Just amazing songwriting from these guys. It's a perfect symphonic power metal song. Listen to it. I don't know why you'd be watching this if you haven't heard that song, but if you've not, you're a bit silly. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you in the next one.